All right, so I'm here with Nick Murdick, who is the
mountain bike product manager for Shimano North America.
Great, and we're here on the first ride for the new XTR 1x and 2x groups. We're here in Crested Butte, Colorado. We just dropped down the 403 trail here, beautiful trail in Crested Butte, and just wanted to get some questions with Nick. So, what point I know you're new to your role, so what point in that XTR development were you brought over to this?
We were kind of finalizing specs, I guess. So I came in to the team about March of last year officially, and was kind of like filling in my previous role. I was on the product team, but just handling more aftermarket stuff. So I've been working with the group since March of 2016, and we kind of were choosing our specs and verifying that they were the right choices with athletes at that time. And since then, it's been actually making the stuff.
Cool. And how close are we to production of the final group?
Right now, the process that's going on at the factory in Japan is that they are confirming all the mass production processes. So the machines that are actually going to make the components, and that's what Tyler got to see in Japan. In fact, the very first crank that anybody, including me, saw was when they were like taking it out of the CNC machine for the post-forging CNC machine work that gets done to it, and we were like, hey, that's the crank. So once they get all of that stuff done, then they'll flip on the machines, and we'll build up inventory for a couple of weeks, and then we'll start shipping in the fall.
Okay. So probably one of the burning questions on everyone's mind, why did it take Shimano so long to really fully embrace the 1x ideology?
Well, let's see here. I think it really took 12 speed, to tell you the truth. Like during the 11 speed 1x era, there was still a bit of a compromise in order to make that work, right? That if you were going with a single front chainring, there was a very good chance that you were going to be running out of gears at some point. And everybody gears their bike so that they have the low gear that they need, and it was just a matter of when you're going to get spun out, and that could be a relatively low speed on an 11 speed system. My 1x11 bike that I was riding up until real recently, that was about 22 miles an hour. I like a pretty low gear for some of the Santa Ana mountains, all-day epics and stuff like that.
These mountains?
That would, yeah, I would do a nice low gear for that. So, I mean, for sure, right? Everybody knows we got caught a little bit off the back, that we were kind of like, look, if it's not a perfect solution and the front derailleur works so well because we make kind of a better front shifting system, then I mean, I don't think that it would be too shocking to say that we maybe stuck with it a little bit too long. We do have like a 4-year production cycle too, so okay. With M9000, you know, 4 years ago, things weren't quite as clear as they are now, what the market like requirements are, and the market told us very clear that they wanted a 1x12 drive trail.
Okay. So what would you say to the consumer that thinks that at this point you're maybe following SRAM's lead? Like what's going to set the XTR system apart from the competition, and it's going to make them want to buy this group?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a question that we had to ask ourselves an awful lot, was like, the market is telling us that they want exactly this thing, like just make that, and so many people said, I just want an XTR version of that, like that's the bike that I want. And so we couldn't ignore that, but we also didn't really want to follow, so we were kind of looking for what opportunities were still out there, and I think maybe it still is a little bit of a stretch to say that everybody can be covered by a cassette with a 500-ish% gear spread, and then just choose your chainring size. You know, especially when we're talking at the pro level, that we get a lot of pros that aren't using all 12 of those gears and don't need that much range. And so, right, really early on, the question was, what can we give that guy that doesn't need the 500% range? And that's where the other two cassettes come in. Just take away the 12th one and get yourself a lighter cassette, or get yourself perfect gear steps all the way across the cassette. So those are kind of the two other choices, and that front derailleur is still there if you want.
Yeah. Great. All right, so why the new free hub body? Why micro spline? Couldn't you have done the same thing with XD, or is it just that Shimano would never accept a SRAM design, or what's the?
It is both, right? For
okay.
sure. Like really, the XD driver body was based around a one-piece cassette, or something that, you know, is only driven off of the inside, because it only has splines in that part. And so our idea of having a carrier with all of the different cogs mounted to it, which makes it really easy to change cog material so that you've got the right material in every place. Like it didn't really just jive with that system. To be clear, right? Like it was never considered, so that's kind of just, it's an excuse after the fact.
Sure.
The micro spline specifically, right? Like we came out with that free hub body design in 1978, the year that I was born, so 40 years ago, and I'm 39 for a little bit longer. It was designed before like we had the capabilities to make that kind of thing out of aluminum, and we've never made that spline pattern out of aluminum because it gets gouged out, and a lot of other people have, right? Like aluminum is kind of the right material for a free hub body. Titanium is really expensive, it's light and it doesn't get gouged out, and steel doesn't get gouged out, but it's kind of heavy, but it's cheap. And aluminum really like is the sweet spot in all of those things, that we can bring the price point down, and with a different spline pattern we can get rid of the gouging too. Cool. So it was kind of, it was a little bit of out of necessity, right? Like there needed to be something different about the free hub body in order to get the 10 on there, so we kind of just seized the opportunity.
Cool. And it's silent.
And it is silent. It's
wonderfully silent.
Micro spline and silent aren't necessarily the same thing. But yeah.
About the spindle, so you kept with the 24mm spindle. Is it really that much of an advantage to a 30mm spindle, or is it a disadvantage in some cases?
When 30mm spindles first came out, we did an awful lot of studies and really couldn't show like an efficiency benefit, anything like that. So for the extra like complication of different standards and different bottom brackets, and maybe there's a compromise in your bottom bracket design, like our engineers basically evaluated it for a couple of years and then decided that it wasn't for us.
Okay.
So we're just sticking with the 24mm spindle and the single standard, and we only make 2 kinds of bottom brackets, a press in one and a thread in one.
Cool. Can you explain is it the Hyperglide Plus shifting a little bit for the viewer?
Yeah, so that actually is the other separation that we feel between us and the existing 12-speed option that's out there. That throwing some technology at the group was the other thing that we felt we had some room for improvement on. So the way that the chain interfaces with the chainring, and of course the cassette, that's where the Hyperglide Plus part comes in, is really a big difference. And it's something that we've actually had designs on and been trying to make work for a couple of generations now. And we finally got to the point where our manufacturing and engineering capabilities are there. So what Hyperglide Plus is basically is that the chain is engaged with 2 cogs at the same time. And it's been doing that since the 80s, where you're shifting to an easier gear, but it's always just been clunk, clunk, clunk as you're moving to a smaller gear as you're accelerating. So like if you watch people when they're sprinting, especially in a pro race, you can kind of watch their bike jerk as they shift. And there actually is a little bit of a lag where their power that they're delivering into the pedals isn't really going anywhere. And for a bit, it's going to the previous gear, the one they don't want anymore. So what Hyperglide Plus does is it starts engaging and driving the next gear before it's completely left the first one. So it's like a third of the time that it took before for your power to actually transfer to the next gear. And so it's not like completely silent and as smooth as it is for climbing up to a bigger gear, but it allows you to keep the power on through the entire
So when you're
process.
really sprinting and you want to get a harder gear, it just pop, 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 just real quick into that gear.
Yeah, and it's hard to describe. Like it's not necessarily a pop, like it's more of a glide.
Okay, all right.
But you can do it under an incredible amount of load, and in fact the idea works better when there's higher tension on the chain. So it really starts to shine when you are really getting after it.
Cool. All right, I guess the last question. When can we see this in XT?
As soon as possible, right? We still have our development cycles.
Yeah.
So it'll be a year, but if we can make it less than a year, we will, for sure.
Great. Thanks, Nick.
All right, thanks, man. Good riding with you.
Thanks.